Welcome to Aquarian Diary, where we discuss issues around the emerging age of Aquarius. I'm your host, John Irving. Thank you for joining me. Greetings all. It is Saturday, January 22nd, 2022. At least that's when I'm recording it. It may take me longer to actually edit it and publish it. I'm posting this as a follow-up to the recent video I did on the USA Pluto return, Civil War or Transformation. I will put a link to that in the description of this video. Consider this part 2. I need to say, first of all, that I'm covering a very complicated and deep subject. And we are in the middle of Mercury retrograde and Venus's retrograde. So you would not believe how much time I have spent trying to put this together. What I'm going to be talking about here is really mundane astrology, or the study of how astrology applies to nations and world events and world affairs. Is very complicated and deep, and I wanted to make it at the same time concise so that it wouldn't be too long. I could actually speak for hours about this, and so it's been very challenging for me to try and condense it into a form that would be palatable for most people. So please take that into consideration. If this sounds like it was edited a lot or recorded at different times, it's because it was. I must also say that there's been a real bee in my bonnet to get this out there, like for a week. Just a fire under my butt to do this. So I'm pulling an all-nighter to get this done. And like I said, this is reasonably complicated stuff. Like, for example, this Pluto return of the United States. Pluto returns have been linked to the fall of great empires in history, or at least the beginning of the end of empires. So this alone is a very big subject. However, there's also an imperative to get the general gist of what's going on out there because it's extremely time sensitive. And there are a lot of very profound events occurring in the world right now that are truly epic and historic. And I'm getting strong body chills here as I say that. You'll hear me say that periodically, by the way. It is a form of psychic or intuitive validation that what I am touching on or thinking about or discussing is of actual significance or importance. So I really want people to be aware of what's going on, at least at a very high level. And for those who are interested, you can do as much research and reading as you want on this subject. But at least I can give you a sense of what's going on and what themes we might expect to emerge. We can't really predict detailed events with phenomenal precision with astrology. But what we can do is look at what themes are going to be present, because of course we can't literally predict the future, and history is always unfolding and events always occur that are surprising. And in fact, even that is built into astrology. There are things that we can't literally predict or anticipate, but we can determine when major changes or significant events are likely to occur. So pursuant to the video that I did about the USA Pluto return, which was obviously also very short, I need to also address something else that is happening concurrently, which is very significant as well, and because of the timing is closely linked to the USA Pluto return, and namely that is the opposition of Neptune to the USA's natal Neptune, which is occurring at roughly the same time as the Pluto return. This adds whole other multidimensional layers to the drama that is unfolding and that will unfold. Neptune's orbit is about 165 years. The opposition will occur at roughly 82.5 years. You may have noted the correlation between that figure and the average lifespan of someone in the developed world, approximately. Now we need to talk a little bit about the positioning of Neptune in the USA natal chart. The USA Neptune is located in the 9th house in Virgo, which is kind of a challenging place to be because its home sign is Pisces, the opposite sign. So when it's in Virgo, it's in its detriment. Because Virgo likes to deal with a lot of details, it's very analytical and rational, and Neptune is almost like the opposite kind of energy. Neptune is about dematerializing, spirituality, egalitarianism, and in its lower manifestation, it deals with illusions and fantasy and not being in touch with reality and escapism and things like that. So these energies kind of conflict. Now, the 9th house is not actually a bad place to have Neptune. The 9th house deals with all things foreign, things international, things overseas. It deals with higher education, the law, philosophy, religion, academics and academia, the courts, the justice system, what's right and wrong, the educated classes, publishing and communication over long distance. The philosophical and religious and spiritual aspects of the 9th house are something that Neptune can be quite comfortable with. When Neptune is well aspected or situated, it can be very idealistic and humanitarian, spiritually oriented, egalitarian, and self-sacrificing even. But when it's not well aspected, it can manifest as delusion or self-delusion, being deluded by others, being deceived, let down, or misled by others, which can be very depressing when fantasies or wishful thinking inevitably bring us crashing down to earth, or we are misled or betrayed by others, or believe that we have been betrayed, as Neptune influences can involve a lot of projection. Hence, Neptune's association with drugs or stimulants as a means of escapism or other forms of escapism. But like I said, Virgo is kind of fussy and focused more on the minutiae and details of daily life. And that's not necessarily something that Neptune is particularly adept or comfortable with. So there is that contrast. Now, there's a very strong square between Neptune and Mars in the 7th house in the USA natal chart. This square is within 1 degree of being exact, making it very strong and challenging and therefore significant. This Mars is in Gemini, which rules the 7th house of the chart. And Gemini is ruled by Mercury. Gemini is mutable air, and Virgo, where Neptune is situated, is mutable earth. Mars is the ruler of Aries, which governs the 1st house, the house of self. Here it is situated in the opposite house, the house of others. So it is not the most comfortable place for Mars to express its individualistic and often self-oriented energies. The 7th house is the house of close relationships and business partnerships, so it rules all things around contracts and negotiations, including things like treaties around war and peace, and open enemies, as opposed to enemies that we cannot perceive. So in this case, our enemies would be apparent to us. And it also, interestingly, deals with women in the society and how they are treated. As Venus, The natural ruler of the seventh house is a very feminine and graceful energy. The seventh house is generally a house that looks for harmony, ideally. So having Mars, the traditionally masculine planet of war and combat and competitiveness and aggressiveness in the seventh house can make for challenging relationships, both internally amongst parties in a group, or in this case, a country, and externally with foreign nations or neighbors. So back to this prominent square between Neptune in Virgo in the ninth and Mars in Gemini in the seventh, the ninth being international higher education, etc., the seventh being partnerships and agreements and close relationships, where Mars is situated. This can be associated with your desires or your drive or your ambition or your will being challenged by beliefs or ideas or perceptions that are not necessarily grounded in reality. Mars, being the god of war traditionally, also rules acts of aggression. So we can see how this has kind of played out with U.S. history, where there's been a lot of international ninth house acts of aggression, Mars, that have not played out very well. Think Vietnam, think the Iraq War, the Gulf War, think Afghanistan, think incursions into other countries where the U.S. perhaps felt like it was acting from some place of higher purpose or higher ambition or intention, when in fact it was misguided. And there were many losses associated with these foreign acts of aggression, great monetary losses, significant casualties and maiming of citizens, seemingly in vain. Neptune, soldiers, Mars, the military, Mars, losses to status, losses to its credibility in the eyes of the global community, and so forth, because its acts of aggression were not necessarily based on reality, or were misinformed, or based on misleading information or false information or false premises, aka lies. These are some of the lower aspects of Neptune. And all of these questionable or dubious sacrifices, Neptune, have left an indelible stain on the psyche of the nation and its history. Lost causes, Neptune. Just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that the intentions were always necessarily malicious. Sometimes they were actually done with the belief or faith that they were doing what was in the good of somebody else. It's just that somebody else might not agree with you, as has often been the case. You know, evangelizing, toppling foreign governments and imposing dictators, trying to impose your worldview on other nations by force. You know, turns out some people don't like that, and will even hold grudges against you for that. Somebody else, seventh house, Mars. But I digress. The ruler of the ninth house traditionally is Jupiter. This is the planet of expansion, and it brings to mind the unprecedented scope and scale of the U.S. military-industrial complex, and how the military is integrated into so many aspects of American life. There are a lot of developed European countries and countries like Canada where we certainly have militaries, but they do not play nearly as a significant role as they do in the United States. As I record this, the annual U.S. military budget is $750 billion, far greater than the annual GDP of most countries on the planet. So when we're talking about transiting Neptune, opposing the natal Neptune of the United States, it's also squaring the Mars of the United States from the opposite position. transiting Neptune opposing natal Neptune, forming a T-square to natal Mars. So what Neptune will do by transit is we will go through periods where we can feel very sort of disconnected from reality, or almost be living in some kind of a fantasy realm or world that is not very grounded. And these transits can make us very aware of how we are sort of deluded or how we delude ourselves. Neptune is currently transiting the third house of the USA natal chart and has been since 2008 or 2009 and will be for the most part through early 2026. Neptune is currently in Pisces and also will be in Pisces right up until early 2026. This transit of Neptune through its home sign of Pisces has been associated with the post-truth era and the off-the-charts levels of BS, lies, deception, deceit, conspiracy theories, the craziness, the massive number of people who believe in things that literally aren't true and are not verifiable and never will be. Basically, this mass hysteria and mass delusion that many of us are observing. Now, why some of us are able to distinguish between fact and fabrication, and so many of us aren't, is another whole question. And if anyone knows, please let me know. Actually, I think one of the readers at one point said that there would be massive numbers of people who would literally be going crazy right now as the energies started to uplift here on planet Earth. Maybe that's it. Now, this transit of Neptune through the third house of the United States chart in Pisces is particularly problematic and challenging because the third house governs communications. That includes print and broadcast and media and newspapers and periodicals and radio and television and fake news. And so, of course, we have seen just like mind-boggling levels of complete nonsense being produced in vast quantities from many disreputable media sources in the United States that have been contributing to this mass delusion and mass hysteria. And so Neptune in Pisces amplifies that, and then this opposition from transiting Neptune to the natal Neptune of the US in the ninth house, which also includes religion, and an ill-aspected Neptune can, especially the ninth house, can lead to fanaticism, religious zealotry, fundamentalism, cult-like behavior. You know, I've always been very curious about how a superpower like the United States could have such strong levels of fundamentalism. And if we look at the evangelicism in the United States, it's, to me, always struck me as very peculiar how such an advanced, powerful country, a global superpower, could have such levels of fundamentalism and fundamentalist influence over the affairs of the nation and seek to impose its worldview and rules on the nation, Neptune in Virgo in the ninth, squaring Mars in Gemini in the seventh. We know that the evangelical community in particular was extremely supportive of the former President Trump, and many people have pointed out the incredible levels of hypocrisy related to that situation. It is virtually impossible to actively participate in public life in the United States unless one is openly and actively engaged in organized religion and is religiously affiliated. In my own personal view, the influence that the religious right has in America is nothing short of tyrannical, plain and simple. What I have been describing is a relic of the Piscean age. But this will not persist as we move further into the age of Aquarius. Strong chills here. Very strong. So I encourage people to be willing to speak the truth. But back to the topic at hand. And so we now have this incredible level of polarization within the United States, the Pluto return, where we have half the population, let's just say half, it's not exactly half, but let's say half the population trying to bring the country back to some mythical past that didn't really ever exist, like I said before, unless you're a middle-class, privileged white person, and how a lot of these sort of fantasy sort of beliefs are governing or influencing not only internal policies within the country, but foreign policy as well. So we have this Neptune opposition occurring at roughly the same time as the Pluto return. We know that what is driving a lot of the politics on the right in the U.S. has its roots in racism and segregation. This is unresolved karmic stuff from the roots of the country. And that is being brought to everyone's awareness now. We're all becoming aware of how these forces are acting against each other. Those who are progressive and want the country to evolve along the lines of higher ideals versus those who want to take the country back to some, like I said, mythic past. Now, I looked back at history a little bit, and the last time Neptune opposed its natal position in the United States, which is the same transit that is occurring again now, was in 1857 through 1859. This is just before Lincoln was elected, and the Civil War began a couple years later over slavery. Pluto returned. The last time Neptune returned to its natal position in the United States, this is the Neptune return we're talking about for a moment. It's different from the opposition, but very closely related, was 1937 to 1940, just before the U.S. entered the Second World War, formally after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Chills there. So the Neptune return and the Neptune opposition seem to precede very significant events in American history. The dates I'm about to give are when the aspects are within a tight 2-degree orb. Now, these aspects are actually in play for longer than that, but within a 2-degree orb is when the energies are particularly intense. So bear in mind that the influence of these aspects would be felt often for years preceding and years after these aspects are exact or most intense. I'll put the dates for these transits on the screen. The overall time period for Neptune opposing natal Neptune in the United States is, again, within a tight 2-degree orb here, from the spring of 2020 until early 2023. The Pluto return for the United States is early 2021 until early 2024. So we have this Pluto return, the first Pluto return in the history of the United States, which is and will be bringing to light many of the unresolved karmic issues that go back to the founding of the nation. And so here we are now in 2022, and we've seen over the past few years that much of the polarization in the United States, socially and politically, really revolves around racism and whether white people are losing their status as the dominant cultural and political force in the United States. And we can see clear linkages now to how this is playing out astrologically. The third exact of Neptune squaring the United States Mars is on January 29th, 2022. The first exact of the United States Pluto return this year is on February 20th. And there will be a third exact of the Neptune opposition on March 1st, 2022. January 29th, February 20th, March 1st. I got to be honest, when I started digging into this in more detail recently, I was kind of overwhelmed by the intensity and significance of this. The polarization in the 19th century was so extreme that it led to civil war, and the level of polarization now has many echoes of that, both in theme and in amplitude. At the end of May until the end of February of 2023, Saturn will be conjuncting the natal moon of the United States, with one and only exact, which will be February 11th of 2023. That is one very challenging transit. Most people will have experienced that in a lifetime, if not a couple times, or even 3 maybe. It's important to note that it takes Saturn only 29.5 years to orbit the Sun, as opposed to 165 for Neptune and 248 years for Pluto. So Saturn will conjunct the moon in a person's natal chart, or a nation's natal chart, once every 29.5 years. It occurs far more frequently than the major transits of Neptune and Pluto that we have been previously talking about. Saturn conjunct Moon is one of the more challenging aspects that I have seen people go through personally. It's a very difficult period, emotionally and psychologically, if not materially and pragmatically. The moon is the most sensitive point typically in a natal chart. In mundane astrology, it represents the common people and the state of the welfare of common people. And Saturn, the lord of karma and rules that must be followed, can be very cold and detached and almost ruthless seeming, as it tries to strip away things that are not based in truth and integrity. And so with the U.S. going through a Pluto return, a Neptune opposition, Neptune squaring the Mars, and Saturn conjuncting the moon, I get overwhelmed thinking about the implications of all of this. As I've said before, basically, we need to fasten our seatbelts. I'm getting chills of reinforcement energy here. Listen, when Saturn conjuncts the moon of the United States, like I said, we're going to start feeling that the end of May. That's never an up period. That's never an uplifting emotionally. That's never fun. I have seen people go through very difficult periods, even when Saturn was in the moon sign, which is a 2.5-year period when Saturn is in one's moon sign. This period can be like the dark night of the soul. This period that we're entering, that we're already in, is just kind of mind-blowingly tumultuous and challenging in many ways. So it was really hard for me to try and condense this all down into something that was short and concise. Like I said before, this could be an extremely long discussion. So I hope I did a fairly good job for you, and that you're able to connect the dots on all of these major transits that are coming up this year and next year. Anyway, I hope this helps and you find it useful. Thanks for your likes, subscribes, shares, and comments. And all the best until next time. Bye for now.